Welcome back to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. We have a special guest on this episode. Please welcome from the Dayton Daily News and Cedarville University, Jeff Gilbert. Jeff Gilbert's a freelance writer for the Dayton Daily News and a professor of journalism for Cedarville. Find out more about our special guest, Jeff Gilbert, after this ad break. Hi, this is Lee W. Mowen of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, here to talk about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Welcome to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. The podcast talking local Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio area sports. Listen on your favorite podcast platforms by visiting cindaypod.com. That's CINDAYPOD.com. Intro theme is Overdrive by Matrika from Uppbeat.io. Here's your host, Lee W. Mowen. And here on the phone is Jeff Gilbert. Jeff, how are you today?
Doing well. It's enjoying the weather this week.
Yeah, it's been pretty nice weather this week. Pretty baseball weather. It's just a shame that the Dragons are on the road.
I know. But they'll be back next week, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. They've got some new, they just made pretty big roster changes, and so it'll be interesting to see where they go from here after sort of things not going well down the stretch of the first half for them.
That was a tough way to end that first stretch, wasn't it? Just up 8.5 games with 15 to go, and then.
I know. It's. I kept thinking like, okay, I'm going to be out of town when they clinch the first half. Hopefully, somebody else can get there to cover the game. Or if they clinch on the road in Cedar Rapids, can I get on the phone with, the manager and a player or something that next day and write something? And then it just kept going sideways for them. So, that's kind of baseball. I mean, you never know when you're going to be hot or cold. And it's just too bad. They were playing so well and winning so much for it to just sort of disintegrate like that. That's tough. But, they're in it for other reasons too. So we'll see what happens with the second half.
Exactly. And there's one more playoff spot to go. So who's to say that Dayton can't lock that pot?
Right. They can win the second half. Maybe they'll be the comeback team in around the 1st of September. Who knows?
That'd be really cool. So let's begin. Where are you from?
I grew up in this area. I'm from New Carlisle. I went to Tecumseh High School, and then I took newspaper jobs. I went to Cedarville University for college, and actually majored in broadcasting with some journalism and a couple of journalism classes along with that, more of a broadcast nature. But writing is what I liked to do. I started doing that some, and then I was able to get a job at a small paper in Virginia and spent a good number, 22 years basically working newspaper work before I moved back to Ohio.
And what was that process like, starting off with the small paper and then coming back up to your home area?
Well, it was interesting. I started a paper, about a 18,000 circulation paper, and that covered some small towns in a rural area in the mountains of Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley. And so it was a beautiful place to live and everything. I was there like 9 years. I always wanted to come back to Ohio. It was hard in that time. The newspaper business was very competitive in terms of trying to find get new jobs and so forth. So nothing ever really panned out. I had interviewed a couple times, a couple different things, and then one reason or another didn't work out. I ended up down in Roanoke at the Roanoke Times, which is like one of the 3 big papers in Virginia. and I ended up being sports editor there for about 4 or 5 years. And then I came back here to basically did an overall career change. Came back here to work at Cedarville and teach journalism. So they were starting a journalism program. I was on an advisory group when they were talking about starting it. They flew me in. Was in meetings and talking about what should a journalism program look like. So I was involved in that process. And then several months later, when they were looking for somebody to come in and teach, the requirements were such that I qualified requirement wise when I hadn't before, because they were looking for some advanced degrees. But I said, hey, I'll come and do it and get a master's degree, which is what they asked me to do. So I ended up getting my master's in 2014. I came back in 2009 to start teaching, and then finished my master's in 2014. And so that's sort of there's a lot of stuff to that, but of how that all happened. But that's basically how it happened. And so I was happy to get back to where I'm from for many reasons, multiple reasons, which including, since we're talking about sports here today, was, now I live and work in an area where, like, I grew up, all the teams I follow are here. I can see them on TV more often. That's all, go to games and follow them more closely than I could from, 3 states away. So it's been a great move overall. And I've really enjoyed being back in where I'm from.
In your eyes, how did the sports scene differ from Roanoke to the Dayton area?
Well, in Roanoke, it's college. It's all college and high school, really, with some Redskin. Well, what used to be the Redskins thrown in, and NASCAR. NASCAR was huge down there. But the Roanoke TV market had the highest NASCAR ratings every year. It's TV ratings. Yeah. So not in terms of viewers, but, in a rating sense, percentage wise. So, we had a full-time NASCAR writer at our paper who traveled the circuit. Virginia Tech is just down the road from Roanoke. So that was right there in our backyard. So we covered, big time. I mean, we're talking, I started there late 90s. And then, so the Michael Vick era started in 2000. And then so Virginia Tech football was just huge. In a sense, a little bit like Ohio State football is around here. And of course, you got high school stuff. And then University of Virginia, we covered them full time too. They're a little farther away outside of our coverage area, within our footprint, but still obviously a ton of UVA fans in Virginia. So that was that. And here, you've got more pro teams. Mm-hmm. You just do. And so with all that, that's kind of the difference. So if you look at the front page on a normal day in Roanoke versus Dayton, similar size papers, Dayton's a little bigger market, but not a ton bigger. You're going to see more college, more kind of local, more maybe there's a minor league baseball team there too for the Red Sox in Salem. And the high school stuff is going to get to that front page a little more often there than it does in Dayton. Dayton's going to be a little more, if it's Ohio State or UD basketball or the Bengals or the Reds, we're going to dominate the front page. High school stuff's going to get out there when it's really big. We would put high school stuff on the front page more often there than gets done here. And that's just because there's more competition for that space here than there was there.
Let me ask, you mentioned you went to Cedarville with a degree in broadcasting with some journalism mixed in there. What was the turning point that you knew you wanted to be a journalist?
That's a good question. Well, when I was in high school at Tecumseh, we had a journalism teacher. She had worked in newspapers for a long time before she got into teaching, and she was like head of our English department at the high school. And she ran the journalism program there. He had a journalism class. And so I was involved with the student paper my last 2 years of high school. And I did a lot of writing. I wrote feature stuff on everything and including sports, and sort of did a column. So I was very interested in it at that point. College choices, I chose Cedarville for other reasons, not just what I wanted to study. And broadcasting always interested me too. I kind of wanted to be in sports, and I liked the broadcast side. I was interested in that. I was interested in writing. I was interested in both. So that's where I went. And then coming out of my junior year, I'm like, I like this part of it. But I also like to write. And so I got a job. So my mind started shifting like, what do I want to really do? So I got a job at the Springfield News-Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Guy named Tim Busey hired me. He was a sports editor back then. And he worked with me and brought me in. And I would go in on the high school nights and answer the phones and write up the little 2 paragraphs on the high school games and take the box scores. And so I started doing that. And then I started out with the fall with football season, and then deep into the fall season, he needed help with some coverage of some playoffs with soccer. So he sent me to a high school soccer game, Shawnee and Catholic Central. And I'm not a soccer player. I didn't know very much about the sport, but something kind of important happened late in the game, and I was able to write something around that. And he gave me, he let me do a basketball game or two. I did a couple things in the spring, and I was pretty sold. I'm like, this is what I want to do. I'm really into this. So then I was able to get a job at a paper in Virginia. And so happened the sports editor was a Cedarville grad as well. And through, networking connections, I was able to get down there and interview and get hired. And then when I got into it full time, I'm like, yeah, this is what I love to do. And so that's kind of how it happened.
You're currently with the Dayton Daily News. What are some of the teams and topics you cover?
Well, I've been doing the Dragons now the last 2-3 seasons, pretty full time beat guy for that because, when Mark Pendleton retired, he was the prep editor and he did the Dragons was his summer beat. And, so they needed somebody to handle the Dragons mostly in the summer. So I raised my hand for that and jumped into that. And I will add, if you go back to those days, that college job at the Springfield News-Sun, there's some names you probably know that were on that staff. One was Mark Pendleton.
Yep.
Rob Aller, who's a columnist for the Columbus Dispatch now, and Doug Harris, who wrote for a long time for the Dayton Daily News, full-time, covered UD, covered Ohio State, and still works now as a freelancer like I do on certain things. He covers a couple things. So that was like I look back at that. I learned a lot from those guys in that one brief year or 9 months that it was. So high school coverage was real important at the News-Sun. It was in all my other jobs, writing and stuff that I did. And so when I came back here, I reached out to the sports editor of the News-Sun and I said, hey, I'm here in town. I got some free time on occasion. I would be interested in making a little extra money, covering some high school sports. So he hired me to do that. So I've been doing high school sports for the Cox paper since 2009. That's mostly what I do. Like I said, I do the Dragons. I'll fill in, pick up a UD game, pick up a couple of Wright State basketball games if somebody can't be there that normally does it. Wittenberg, just here and there, a little college stuff, but not anything long term, but mostly high school. So I did high school stuff in Clark County for a few years, and then when Mark Pendleton retired 3 years ago, and another guy came in to do. Mike Cooper came back as a stringer wanted to do high school sports more in Clark County. I said, well, I'll do more of the Dayton area. So that's really what I cover now, is heavily in the Dayton area with sport, with high school sports, mostly football and basketball. Those are the ones that generate most of the interest. That's where we put most of our effort into. But I've covered state golf tournament. I've covered golf tournaments. I've covered, certainly baseball, softball, a little bit. I've covered state soccer finals in Columbus, cross country meets, all that kind of stuff. But mostly football and high school basketball have been, that's where I spend most of my time.
Who's been some of your favorite athletes to cover, or how about what's been some of your favorite games you got to write about?
In this area in the last few years, I'll stick to that because if I mention stuff from way back, you guys won't even. I mean, nobody here knows what that is. Really covering the Cedarville boys basketball team the last 2 seasons has been a lot of fun. They won a state title. They came up just a little short this year. I enjoyed that. The games were good. I enjoy Coach Cups and talking to him and working with him and the kids on that team. Brooke, Gabe Cups and Tom House and Rich Rolfe particularly have been fun to cover. Even you go back a couple of years before that, before they got to state, a kid like Mo Jai, I really enjoyed talking to him. And so getting to know some of these kids, and I like kids. I coach too. I do some coaching, and so I like being around those. I just learn. I feel like I learned stuff. I mean, here I am. I'm 57 years old. I feel like I learned stuff talking to a 17-year-old. It's kind of weird, but they have different perspectives on life. They've been under different training than I have, and so I enjoy learning from them and just hearing their stories. So they were that as a team has been good. When Trotwood boys won the state title, what's that been now? 4 years?
Yeah, 4 years, 5 years.
With them, Mari Davis was a senior. I covered that state run, and that was a lot of fun. Football games there's so many football games that are fun. There's so many storylines in football games. I can't even pick one out at this moment that I would say is right up there. There's just a lot of, I enjoyed, I always like to tell some of my friends, I said, especially this past year with what Joe Burrow did with the Bengals is like, and since he's won the Heisman, I'm like, yeah, I saw him play high school football as a sophomore. And, they played Springfield Shawnee in a regional game, I think, over around Columbus, in the Columbus area. And it was a really close game, and Burrow let him down the field in the fourth quarter to beat Shawnee. And I'm like, this kid is pretty good. I'm like, he's going to play college ball somewhere and be good. Now, I would be lying if I said he's going to win the Heisman and lead the team to the Super Bowl. But, you could see he would. And the more I think back about that, it's like, yeah, that sort of specialness about him that we see, it was present then. It was really present then. So he's just, to see him grow into what he's become has been pretty amazing. I like to do feature stories too. Mm-hmm. I did a story last fall on a volleyball player from Vandalia Butler who'd been adopted. And she was getting to know her birth mom. Mm-hmm. And through the last year, and her birth mom was coming to the volleyball games. And so her adoptive parents and her birth mom had developed a good relationship. And so just that story of that volleyball player, she's going to play at Wittenberg, because she's also a good player. She wasn't just a member of the team. And so that was a good story. I did a story on a girl from Wayne High School a few years ago. She's on the track team at UD now. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember her name, Taylor, and her last name escapes me at this moment. But she's dealt with lupus and things like that all her life. And so trying to be a good track athlete and deal with the sun, which is a problem, and all that was a really interesting, fun story to do. And just, there's just been other ones, but those sort of stand out to me as some of the more, fun stories, interesting stories to do, to just tell that person's story in a way that hopefully people can connect to.
I mean, you mentioned that Joe Burrow was good against Springfield Shawnee, but you never thought, hey, maybe one day he'll win the Heisman, and maybe one day he'll lead the local NFL team towards their first Super Bowl in quite some time.
Yeah.
I still think about that too. And that's just, that's crazy, but it's awesome. I love.
Yeah. You see people when they're young, sometimes you don't really know. I mean, I remember first time I saw Centerville basketball when Gabe Cupps was a freshman. And I mean, he was such a little kid as a freshman on that team, but was already running that team. And I'm like, this kid's going to be good. Did I think he would be Mr. Basketball this year? No, I didn't predict that. But so that's as much as we try to predict about sports, and that's fun and look into the future. One of the great things about sports is that it's so surprising. It surprises you every day. And so things happen that you're not expecting. When you watch a game, when you hear news about a player, when you hear, just recruiting, like Ohio State this past week signed two more 5-star wide receivers. I mean, I follow them. I was following the recruiting a little bit, and I knew they were in on a couple guys. I thought, well, I hope that, it'd be great if they get one of those guys. They get both. So it just surprises you constantly. And so I try to take that to my reporting as well, of when I cover a game or when I write a story about somebody, something that I always tell like my students, like, tell me something I don't know. Don't just rehash everything I already know or that I saw. What is stuff that I don't know? And so, or surprise me with a story that nobody saw coming. Nobody would have expected that story. They expect a story off the last Dragons game, right?
Yeah.
But they don't expect, like I did a story earlier this year on Ellie De La Cruz and Jose Torres and what good friends they are. Mm-hmm. That was a fun story to do. And so the readers aren't expecting that. So if you surprise them with that, that's why sports is so surprising, because there's so many stories under the surface that nobody ever hears. And when you sit around and you hear athletes tell stories, it's a lot of fun. So that was another, back to my, stories I enjoyed doing. I really enjoyed sitting in the dugout one day and Jose translating for Ellie and them talking and having a good time. And I could really see how close those guys are. And so that was a lot of fun to do.
So between teaching and writing for the paper, how much time do you spend in a normal week?
Writing? Well, it's a normal, I don't know if there is a normal week.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe the average. I mean, I probably write an average of 15 stories a month. Mm-hmm. And so some months it might be more like 22, like during basketball tournament time, high school basketball tournaments. And then other months there might be 6 or 7, 8 stories to do, just depending on the time of year. So this time of year, how much are the Dragons in town determines how much I'm going to write. I did write 2 stories this week. They made a bunch of roster changes, and so I wrote about that. And then I was able to get Sean Pender on the phone yesterday. I don't know if you saw that story or not, but I was able to get him on the phone. He's the minor league overseer for the Reds, and just talked about some of these guys that have moved up, and the new Tyler Callahan, who just came in from low A, and just. So I was able to knock out a couple stories this week without any games going on. So, I wasn't expecting to write anything this week until I found out, they're making all these moves. They're sending like 3 guys up to AA, and they're bringing in this top prospect from low A and making all these changes. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, I have my summers off from school, so I'm not in class every day. So it gives me more time in the summer at times, but yeah, some of my days and weekends get pretty busy. All our kids are out of the house. I have 3 daughters that are all grown, 2 grandkids now. So, and we're trying to do some stuff with our house, remodeling and some renovation stuff. And so the extra money is good. And so I'm out on the weekends a decent amount. That's okay. That's kind of what we're doing right now. And so, I don't know how long I'll keep doing this to this level, but right now I'm still enjoying it. So I would say back to your question of a week. I mean, I probably write 3 to 4 stories a week on average. Some weeks it might be 5 or 6, but some weeks it might be 1 or 2, or maybe none. Like I was on vacation, I didn't do any, obviously, but,
of course.
So that's kind of how it goes, and like the Pender story or whatever, I call him on the phone. I talk for 15 minutes. I spend an hour and a half putting the story together. So that's like a 2-hour thing. But if I go to a Dragons game, and it's a 3-hour game, from the time I leave home to the time I get home, it's about 6 hours. So, that's, a high school basketball game is a shorter than a football game. So it all varies, but if I go out in the evening to cover something, hopefully I'm in bed by 11:30. That's what. It's certainly by midnight, but I don't teach any early morning classes usually, so that helps.
That definitely helps. Yes.
Yeah, that helps.
And of course, it also helps when the season, there's no high school sports going on at the moment. Maybe football ramping up with 2-a-days soon, but other than that, just the big ticket in town's the Dragons, and
right.
Getting ready to go into football season. How many football games do you get to see on an average season?
Well, I go out every Friday night. So you figure the regular season's 10 weeks long. I might miss one Friday night. Like we have a fall break at school, and sometimes we go out of town for that. And if we do, I have a daughter lives out of state, and 8-hour drive away. So we decide to go see her then over fall break, then I'll miss that one. So 9 or 10, there's those Thursday night games. I've hit 1 or 2 of those in addition. So I'll probably see 11 or 12 regular season games between some Saturday and Thursday night games. And then the playoffs, if I can be at Friday and Saturday night games, those weeks when they're doing, Friday and Saturday games, then, it just depends on how far teams are going to go in the playoffs, but I might see up to 15 or 16 games, probably 17 or 18 once or twice when you count all the playoff games.
And you mentioned that you focus on high schools locally around the Dayton area.
Right.
How far have you had to travel to cover one of these games?
Let's see. The farthest I've ever gone, I think it's probably Findlay, and that was several years ago. That was Kenton Ridge played. I don't even remember what school they played, but they played. It was like a regional final. Mm-hmm. Back when they had Jaden Davis, was a really good running back for that team. One of my favorite kids to cover. He was really good. And they was in Findlay. I've been to Lima, been to Wapakoneta. Playoff time, there's always a Sydney or Piqua trip or 2 in there. And so those are sort of the far ones. But I was almost going to go to Akron to cover Dayton in the baseball tournament this year, but then something else worked out and I didn't have to go. So I was kind of glad for that. I was willing to go. Would have been he would have paid me more, would have made out okay. But it's like, I really want to spend a weekend doing that. So, the great thing about being a freelancer is I can turn stuff down anytime I want. I don't very often. I mostly take whatever they ask me to do, and I pitch stuff to them too, like especially feature stories. I'll say, hey, I've got this story here I want to do, and I'm like, cool, that's good. I talk with the sports editor a lot about, what game you think this week, and I'll say, well, I'm looking at these 2 games, and then together we'll make those decisions. And if he needs me to do something extra, fill in for, like I filled in, and Dave Jablonski, who covers UD basketball, had to be gone one weekend early in the season when they were playing a non-league. Northern Illinois wasn't a big game, and so I covered that game. He said, hey, you want to do this? I'm like, sure, yeah, any chance to go to UD Arena. One of my UD Arena is like, it's one of my favorite places in the whole world.
Yeah, it's a great college basketball palace.
Oh, it's just, I started going to games there in the 70s with my dad. back when Jim Paxson played. And, I mean, I've been to a lot of games there, and the renovations have been great. I love that the high school state tournament is there. I hope we can pack that place next year around here. So if you're listening to this and you like high school basketball at all, go to the state tournaments. I mean, they had 8,000-9,000 in there were their biggest crowds. That place should be full. I'd love to see that place full next year. Especially if you get local teams playing. And I thought maybe it's still COVID hangover. I thought maybe the Centerville game state final might pack the place out, but I think one of the issues with that was it was a Sunday night game at like 8:30. So that's not a good time for that.
Yeah.
That might have hurt the crowd a little bit, but I'd love to see that. And, and UD games are, of course, we know those are a lot of fun. And talk about a team I'm looking forward to seeing play next year. That team is going to be really good.
Men's and women's too, especially with Tamika Williams-Jeter taking the UD job.
Yeah. They'll both be really good. I saw the other day some early prognosticators had already predict UD will be a 5 seed in the tournament next year, and I had said top. I had said a couple months ago, I was talking to a friend about them. I said, "Oh, they're going to be low. They're going to be so good. They could be a top 4 seed next year in the tournament." And so I feel pretty good about that prediction when Nardi or somebody came out and said, looking at them as a number 5. So that's really good. And they're loaded with talent.
Absolutely. Now it's just hoping that, they play to their full ability and injuries avoid them, because I know that hurt them a bit in the A-10 tournament this past season.
Yeah.
Let me ask this. What's some of the nicest compliments you received on your journalism work?
That's interesting. Well, I've won some awards, and that's always feels complimentary over the years, just some state competitions and stuff like that. But, when I left my first job in Virginia, the football, the town we were in, I lived in Strasburg, Virginia. Nobody's probably ever heard of that. It's in the Shenandoah Valley. And they were small school. The high school there was in the small school division, but they were one of the perennial powers in the state. And the guy the coach for that team was just one of my favorite people ever. You could ask a question and he would answer for 15 minutes. He was just, he always had plenty to say, and he was down to earth and good. And so when I left that job, I was there 9 years, and I covered this team. They went to like 5 state finals and lost them all. I mean, they could never get over the hump. But in that 9 years, I think it was like 5 state finals they played in small school, and it just could never win it. And so I knew his wife just a little bit, enough to be friendly and say hi and acquainted. And, when word got out that I was leaving there to go to Roanoke, she sent me a real nice letter or note, just thanking me for all the coverage and everything I'd given to the team and dealt with her husband and so forth. I mean, covering high school sports is different than covering pros. I mean, the pros are getting paid, Yeah. It's fine to question them and be critical of them. High school kids, I'm not going to be critical of high school kids. If a high school kid quits the team, unless he's a big star and it's obviously noticeable, it's probably not going to be mentioned. What's the point? Or he gets in trouble or whatever, but big time star, all state kid. Yeah, you got to deal with that. People need to know something about that because there's a wonder what's going on. But so just covering high school, that's one thing I've enjoyed about that. And so that was nice. And then, just over the years, just people say nice stuff to you, but I just, I won't. I don't know if I should mention who, but a coach and a player from a local team a couple months ago sent me some like thank you notes for just everything I'd done for them, and just, being fair in what I did, and so forth and so on. And just, so that was, those handwritten notes you get mean a lot. I mean, I save them. I got a stack of them, not a big stack, just a very small stack, but I just keep them in an envelope or in a drawer somewhere. And it's just, those are nice. And so that kind of stuff, just has been good.
Now, we kind of touched on this already, but with high school sports going on and collegiate sports as well, would you agree that between the fall and the winter side is the most busiest time for you?
Yeah, it is. Cause the football keeps you busy. Cause I'll write, I'll go to a game on a Friday night, but also, and maybe a Thursday or maybe a Saturday, depending on the schedule that week, which, like I said, there's usually 2 or 3 of those a season. But like during the week, I'll write, I've been trying to write 2 stories like during the week, like something for the Friday paper about a big game, and then something probably by Wednesday, possibly a notebook type of thing where, things about 3 or 4 different things, or maybe a feature story about somebody. And so I stay busy on that. And then I've not covered state cross country, but I've covered it up into that. And so, those Saturdays are long Saturdays, going out to some of those. So I like to do some of that. So that stays pretty busy. I mean, I also think I'm crazy. Sometimes I think I am crazy. Cause I'm doing that. So I'm teaching, and, and I'll spend July here getting ready, a good part of July and the first part of August, really getting ready for my teaching schedule in my classes. And then, but starting August 1st too, I coached a golf team at a Cedarville high school. So, I'll be busy with that. We don't do anything on Fridays, so I'm able to do the Friday night games, but, so I'm out every evening with that. And so getting ready for my classes is important. It helps me manage my time through there. But that ends, golf season ends by the end of September. I'm done with that. So then it lets up a little bit in October, November, you get into playoffs. And then basketball starts, but I also coach middle school basketball. So I don't get to go out as much as I would like to for high school basketball, because I'm coaching 7th graders, and so and we have to practice kind of later. The guy I coach with has a regular type of job, so we can't practice right after school. So we tend to go like 6:30. So sometimes I get out to games, sometimes I don't. We have our own games, but obviously on other nights of the week than Friday. But I get out to as many as I can, try to do some feature stuff, make some phone calls, write up some stuff, try to follow what's going on, boys and girls. It's hard. If I wasn't coaching, I would probably write 3 times as much basketball as I do. But I'm not willing to give up the coaching because I just enjoy that a lot. I enjoy the kids. And my friend that I coach with, we've been doing it now for 7, 8 years together. This will probably be our 7th year, maybe 8th. I lose track. I mean, we just have a great time doing it together. And we just really enjoy it. So, and, the Cedarville High School program has gotten pretty good here lately. And, and we've had all these kids in the early grades. And so we feel like we're a part of that bigger program and developing these kids and getting them ready for high school ball and so forth. And a couple of them have moved on to play college ball now since we've coached in middle school. And so, it's, that's really rewarding. So, I would do more basketball, and sometimes I wish I could, but I like the coaching part too much right now to give that up. It may change someday. We'll see. But for now, I really enjoy it.
How did you get into coaching? You mentioned you enjoyed it, but what was that first step into it?
Well, that's an interesting story. So, I played basketball in high school. I wasn't that good, But I played it and I loved it and I like learning about the game. So back in, I think it was probably in 2000 when I was living in Roanoke, a guy that I started a sports program for homeschooled kids in that greater Roanoke area, which is a metro area of about, 220 to 25,000 people, probably something like that. So it's a big area. And because we were homeschooling our kids at the time, our daughters, and they were pre-high school then. They weren't even they were preteen at that time. And so he started his program, was looking for coaches. I said, hey, I'd like to help with basketball. I've always been interested in coaching. I'd helped a friend do youth league stuff a couple of times, rec league stuff, nothing serious. And so I said, I'd like to get involved in that. So me and a couple of guys said, well, we'll take over this varsity JV boys basketball program that's getting started here, and we'll figure it out. Well, 1 year into it, I was the only one left. The other two guys bailed. And so that first year we won did we even win? We won one game. The next year we won 4 or 5. In the next couple of years, then we got to becoming like a 500 team. We were playing like a small, Christian school schedule, so to speak, for the most part. So I did that for a few years and then coached some girls because I moved out of that into girls because I had daughters, did a little bit of that. And then I was out of coaching for a few years until we moved here. And then once the opportunity, the golf thing came up, because that's another long story. I won't get into that, but I've been doing that for 12 years. And then the basketball thing, they needed somebody, and the AD said, hey, you've done basketball, right? I said, yep. He says, we need a 7th grade coach. And I said, I'll do it. Sounds like fun. So, I don't know that I would ever want to coach any higher level. If I did, I'd have to give up a lot of this other stuff. But right now it's just, I enjoy doing it. So, and I have the time, the teaching schedule. I still have to put in plenty of time on that. It's not like I'm only working 2 hours a day teaching, so nothing like that. But at the same time, it's flexible enough that, you can put in a lot of time in your grading and stuff one day, and the next day you might not have as much time for it because you got a game or whatever. But, then the next day you don't have anything else to do but work on it, so you put in an 8, you put in a 10-hour day, so to speak, getting stuff graded and so forth. So it all balances out. The flexibility of it is what's nice. It's not a 9 to 5 type of job teaching. So it's got to be there for your classes. You got to meet with your students when they want to meet with you. And then you sort of juggle your other time around. And so far it's been working out for me for a number of years. And so I'm just going to continue to do it, I think. And, until God tells me to do something else. But for now, that's what I like doing.
Jeff, what are some of your favorite things about the local sports scene?
Good question. I like the variety of it. Mm-hmm. It's great having a minor league baseball team. It's great having, the pro teams that we have in Cincinnati as well. You've got Ohio State, which is big for everybody. A lot of people around here. The UD basketball is just wonderful. I've been a fan. I've grew up as a fan of them. I think that's a good part of it. Mm-hmm. I think the high school scene is good. I think we've got a lot of talent in this part of the state, and I think that's fun. I think it's just the variety of it is really. If you like, Wright State has been successful in some sports, and so they're entertaining to watch at times and different things. If you live in Springfield, you got Wittenberg. If you want to be smaller schools, so there's just so many different things. Even in the high school, you've got the variety of, you got the GWalk, right? You got all these big schools and Division I athletes. And then, then you can go to the OHC or the CBC or leagues like that, SWBL, and see smaller schools, but it's still can be just as entertaining and fun to watch, and just as good as stories to cover. The best stories aren't just the big time, the biggest, the best. The good stories to write sometimes are, a soccer game that 50 people went to and you got a great story out of it. So it's the variety of it, I would say.
Mentioned a lot of different sports on here, but are there any sports you're a big fan of that people might be shocked to hear about?
I don't think so. I think I'm pretty traditional, football, basketball, baseball, golf. I used to be a boxing fan, when I grew up, you could watch a lot of boxing. Like the big stuff. And then when it went all pay-per-view and then in the last 15, 20 years, it just has sort of dropped off. I got to cover a little boxing back in the day, which was fun, but that's a sport that I like. I'm not really into hockey, or soccer or things like that. I mean, I can cover it. I know enough about it to write about it, interview people and tell the stories, but no, it's not like I'm into curling or anything, odd like that. But I will watch just about anything if it's, if it's the right time, or I would go watch just about anything. But yeah, nothing odd.
Okay. What would you like to see in the future in Dayton, Ohio, in the sports side and also in the media side?
Well, media side, I think, from my perspective of writing, we're writing for the Dayton Daily News, which is funny. I grew up reading that paper in the Journal Herald and so forth back in the day. Mm-hmm. And because they had all the teams I loved in it, all the teams I followed growing up, they wrote about, they covered, they were there. So you got lots of great stuff, and Hal McCoy's still writing Red stuff to this day. So I think it would be, it's like the whole journalism industry there's not enough people doing the journalism anymore. And that's those are economic factors that have taken place. That's a whole big other discussion of why this has all happened. And so just more people, it'd be nice if we had bigger staffs of people to do things. That's what media needs more than anything. You can't, your quality, you can have good people and have good quality, but quantity, you need more quantity. That would be my hope. I don't know that can happen in our economic climate, in the industry. But that would be what I'd want to see. What was the other part of your question?
Future in sports in Dayton. Would you like to see certain sports come back to Gem City, arrive in the Gem City?
So we don't have a hockey team right now, right?
We do not. And we don't have a hockey barn either.
And we don't have a what?
We don't have a hockey arena either.
Oh, yeah. There's no place to play. Yeah, since Hare Arena collapsed, right?
Yep.
So, like I said, I'm not a hockey guy, but for the people that love hockey, that would be good for them. But I like the fact that the Dragons have moved up to High A. I think that helps.
Yeah.
I think I think that some of the state high school tournament being in town, I would love to see them be able to keep that. Not, it's a 3-year contract, I think right now. We've got 2 more years of it.
I think so. Yeah.
I would love to see that extended. I think it's good for the city. And it's half the drive for me to go Dayton to Columbus. So I can be to UD Arena in 30 minutes. It takes me an hour to get to the shot, so that's just me being selfish, but still I like it being there. I think, the first four needs to stay there. I don't know that we need more teams, but this sort of event type of stuff I think is important. Mm-hmm. Having the first four, having state tournaments. I tell you one thing, high school tournament wise, particularly basketball, that I miss, from back in the old days. And I don't think it's going to change, because economically it's probably working for a lot of these high schools and they don't want to give it up. But, I don't know if you remember how far you go back and thinking about this, but when I was young, you would go to the same place every night of the week and see different divisions play, like I grew up near Troy. So we would go to Hobart and, one night it'd be AA teams and the next night, and back then it was AA and AAA, and you'd have AAA teams another night, or you might have a mixture on the same night. You could go like 4 or 5 straight nights and see to the same place and just see different teams from around the area. Now you got to go, I got to go to Butler to see this division. I got to go to Northmont to see this division. I got to go to Springfield to see this. I got to, you know what I mean?
Like one centralized site for
it would be, and why is D4 regionals, districts at UD, and then D1 is like at Vandalia Butler? I mean, does that make sense? Why is it? I mean, nothing against Butler, because that's a good facility. Mm-hmm. Jordan Shoemaker, the AD, there's a friend of mine. I like Jordan a lot. He does a great job. I know that I don't know the figures or whatever, but that's a big financial boost for them to be able to host all that stuff.
Yeah.
And the same would be true for any of the number of high schools around the area, from Brookville to Springfield, and, and everybody in between that hosts stuff. It's a big deal for them. They make good money doing that. And so but just to, to go to UD 3 straight nights and see districts of 1, 2, and 3, I mean, I know that the district finals for Division I were at, they played those at, UC this past year.
Yeah.
But it's the regionals then. I think it's the regional level that's sort of shifted back to some of the high schools. And it's like, the Southwest District is saying, hey, these district championships are huge. We're going to put these in big arenas, right? So they go to UD, they go to Cintas, they go to UC, places like that, and play these big Division I, these big boys district finals. And that's cool. Mm-hmm. Regionals are at Trent, they're at Vandalia, they're at Springfield. It's like, okay, that's fine. It'd just be, and I don't think that's not going to change. It'd just be, and maybe those are the best places for them, because you get the crowd for it and so forth. The other thing I'd like to see is, I think crowds are down from what they used to be. Hopefully people would just go more. I think that would help. I think flying to the hoop is a good thing. Speaking of events, I've covered that heavily the last 3 years. Enjoyed, and mostly write about the local teams, the teams that come in from outside the area, the big all-star teams, with all the D1 guys. I think they sell a lot of the tickets, but, in the end, I don't think people around here know too much about those teams, and they're not really willing to read about it. So we just sort of focus on the local teams when we get there. But, those kinds of things, more special events, I think would be the kind of thing. I don't know if we're saturated on that now or not, but I don't have a need for like a minor league basketball team or whatever, because I just don't. Now, maybe some people do, but I don't feel that need.
I understand. For those that want to get into sports journalism, what advice can you share?
Don't. You're crazy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Read a lot. One thing I find with some of my students is like, do you guys read the news? And they're like, no, not really. I mean, they probably do more than they think they do.
Yeah.
They're clicking a link on social media somewhere and reading something. They don't, they'll watch it maybe. Like, read the news, read the kind of stuff you're interested in writing. Like I've always got a student or two that's interested in the sports side. I'm like, well, what teams do you follow? Do you read about them? I totally encourage them to read. And as you're learning things in class about how to write well and how to tell stories, because I think of myself as a storyteller more than a writer. That's what I try to do. That's what I try to encourage my students to do. I'm like, pay attention to how they're doing it and then put that into practice a little bit. It's okay to be a bit of a copycat and try to emulate what some other people are doing. That's not plagiarism. You're just trying to find ways to do things, how to tell stories and learn from that and try to just tell your story. It's in terms of sports journalism, the nuts and bolts are always there. Tell me a story. Like, I'm going to write a game story on a football game, and I'm going to tell you who the leading rusher was. I'll probably give you some passing stats. I'll tell you who scored some of the touchdowns. I'll give you their records and so forth. That's just a list of facts. So don't just list the facts. Excuse me. What's the story behind all that? So that's where you have to get and interview people and talk to people and so forth. And I will say this too, if you feel like, oh, I'm way too introverted to do that, then I don't agree with that, because I'm about as introverted as you can get. And I do this, right? And I'm sitting here talking to you. Of course, we're on a phone. So, there's less intimidation talking over the phone than in person, I think. But
yeah,
but it's like, if I can do this, then anybody can, and so that's just don't let that hold you back. Because I get students sometimes that way. It's like, oh, I'm being nosy. I feel like I'm so nosy. I just want, I'm asking people questions, and I'm nervous about going and talking to them. I said, well, that's okay. Just do it. You'll get used to it. I tell them there are times when I'm at an event and I've got to track down somebody to talk to who I've never met before. And once in a while I get that little pang of anxiety, and they're like, oh, I'm going to have to talk to somebody I've never talked to before, and I'm almost 60 years old. Well, it was worse when I was 26 and 25 years old than it is now, but it still happens once in a while. And I said, that's normal. Just go do it. Go do it, and find a good place, find a good school that you want to go study it at, and learn how to write and learn how to tell stories and learn how to get the story. That's the biggest thing. It's one thing to be able to write, to be a good writer. You have to be a good reporter too. You really have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to dig for information, and you got to get people to tell you stories and tell you how they feel about things. And if you can do that, once you start understanding how to get people to open up a little bit, which isn't always easy, but if you can get there with people, it'll be better. But the other part of it is, and I tell my students this all the time, this journalism, whether you're a news writer, a sports writer, an entertainment writer, a food critic, I don't care, movie critic, I don't care what it is you're doing. You're not going to sit here in my class for the next 15 weeks and walk out a polished writer. You're not going to go through 4 years of college and be a polished writer. You're going to make progress. But what makes you a polished writer is writing and writing and writing and writing. It's a practice. I think writing is an art and a practice. they call it a law practice and a medical practice for a reason, because when you practice medicine, you practice law because you're always learning and trying to do it better. And so writing is the same way, and reporting is the same way. The more you do it, the better you'll be at it. So I also advise the student. We have a student like newspaper or magazine. Actually, now we do publish like once a semester, but we have an online site too that we write for a lot. And I just try to tell them, I push them. I mean, write for that. Do as much as you can. Every time you write a story, you get just a little bit better. So keep pushing to do that, and that will pay off down the stretch, down the road, that you'll get better at it. And if you don't, you won't. So the people who come to college and focus only on their grades and their classes and their social time, and don't do the co-curricular things of writing on the side, of whether it's freelancing like I do or writing a lot for a school paper or something like that, you're not going to be as ready. It's going to be harder to get a job, because employers, an editor that I might interview with, they don't really care what my GPA was. They care. You've submitted 3 or 4 samples of things you've written, and they care a lot more about how that reads and how good the potential they might see in that than what your GPA was. And that's just a fact. And it's funny to say, here you are, an educator, and you're talking about some things being more important than your grades, but I really think it is. That doesn't mean grades aren't unimportant. It's just,
experience.
If experience matters a lot, and you get the experience you gain more experience by writing and doing those things than you do taking tests. And that's part of it. You have to do that. You have to go through that, but don't just think because you have a degree, somebody's going to hire you. It's not a given. So anyway, that's I'm done preaching now.
I like that piece of advice, though. So thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
How can people follow you and your work on social media, Jeff?
Well, I mostly use Twitter. At JW_Gilbert is my Twitter handle, and I tweet updates from games I'm at, and I retweet, and I push. I always tweet out anything that I publish, plus other things that I see of interest to people. But I really use Twitter for my writing and stuff. I hardly ever use Twitter for anything outside of that. So if you follow me there, you'll see the links to the stuff I write. You'll see updates from games I'm at and so forth. And some games I can do more than others, update more, because one of the things that happened in recent years, I have to take pictures now. So I'm busy taking photos during games. And so I've learned to be a halfway decent photographer. I won't say good, but halfway decent over the last few years, just learning how to do it. So I'm busy with that too. So anyway, but that's how you can follow me.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to seeing you at a future Dragons game.
Yeah, I'll be there. They're at home next week, right? So yep. I don't know if I'll be there on the 4th, but I'll definitely be there Wednesday and through the rest of the week. So
it sounds
good. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate talking about this stuff. It's fun to do. So thanks again for your time.
No problem, Jeff. Thank you for coming on. And that'll do it for this episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. We'll talk to you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. Be sure to bookmark CindayPod.com, spelled CINDAYPOD, the official website of the podcast. You can find your favorite ways of listening to the local Cinday Sports Podcast, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon Music, the iHeartRadio app, and many more. You can also purchase merchandise from TeePublic and Redbubble to help support the podcast. Follow on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CindayPod, and the host at the Lee W. Mowen. The closing theme is Cosmopolitan
from pecan pie on Uppbeat. This is Lee W. Mowen signing off another episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. Thank you for your continued listenership, and join me on the next episode.